Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcella Brown, and I'm the Executive Director of the Black Professionals Association Charitable Foundation. Thank you. And I want to welcome you all to the final event in our 2018 Engage series on civic leadership. The mission of BPACF is to create opportunities for African Americans through scholarship, education, and leadership development. We are here today as a part of our Engage series, which focuses on civic leadership skill development. Throughout this year, we've hosted a variety of workshops trying to help identify minorities that are interested in civic leadership, but also in making sure that as we identify these individuals, we also equip them with the skills and necessary attributes needed to be effective leaders in Northeast Ohio's civic space. So we want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And if you've been a part of the Engage series throughout this year, you've enjoyed learning about parliamentary procedure, the role of the board in civic leaders. You participated in our civic mixer, and we welcome you tonight with our event on compelling communication. Tonight you will be a part of a demonstration of three very unique compelling communication styles: storytelling, spoken word, and formal speech. But before we get into the program, I want to take a moment to acknowledge some very special guests and individuals who have helped to make tonight possible. First, I want to acknowledge our host, Growth Ops. Growth Ops is a capital investment fund that reaches out to various business owners and assists them with capital formation and fund development. With us tonight and hosting us is Mr. Michael Jeans, the President and CEO of Growth Ops, who I'd like to call to the stage to give some welcome remarks. Mr. Jeans?
Thank you, Marcella. Good evening, everyone. I was so compelled to ask Hugh to play Flo Rida, Welcome to My House, right? But didn't think that was what the event called for. We are so honored and thrilled to host both BPA and the topic for the evening of Toastmasters. As Marcella mentioned to you, Growth Opportunity Partners, or as you'll hear us refer to as Growth Ops, our focus and goal is revitalizing urban communities. We still call it the inner city. We focus on providing resources and capital to minority-owned small businesses and to small businesses located in minority communities. We also are particularly focused on improving the quality of life of low-income persons. Tonight I have with me two of my staff members, my Chief Credit Officer, Mr. Jeffrey Clausen, and I also have Mr. Jordan Punch, who is our Vice President of Business Analytics. Jordan? I wanted to take a quick moment, and I only have a quick moment to stand in front of you, but I wanted to take a quick moment to share with you why organizations like BPA are so important. It's not all the time that communities of color, that Black people are recognized for the work that we do. And when we are recognized, it's not always recognized through a lens that can be related to. And so of the many things that BPA does, and I hope if you're not engaged, you'll learn more about the organization, it provides a critical platform for us to know more about each other, about what we've done, what we're doing, and what's to come. And so if there's a message from me to you tonight, let's stay engaged, let's get better at what we do, and let's not forget those who come with us when we do it. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for allowing us to host. Marcella?
Thank you so much, Michael. I also want to take a moment to recognize and acknowledge the BPACF trustees that are with us tonight. We have with us Mr. LaRon Clayton, who is co-chair of the Engage Civic Leadership Series. We have Jermel Carr, our chair of marketing. We also have Yolanda Burt, who serves on our program advisory board, as well as Ms. Yvette Clark in the back, our Emerging Professionals Program Consultant. So thank you so much to all of our board and staff members who are here. I want to ask if LaRon Clayton would just come up and give a few remarks about our Engage Civic Leadership Series.
Good evening, everyone. So I'll be brief. So as Marcella mentioned, she gave you a brief overview of the Engage series. This is a new series with MBPACF that was birthed out of our desire to engage with our community partners and also engage with the community in a different way. So this is the fourth and final event of the year that has been quite successful, to be honest. And so it's good to see that the word is getting out and that people are getting the word about the events through various venues. And so we look forward to next year and creating new partnerships with some of our community partners, but also reaching out and engaging more of our community so that they can come and be present in this space. So I'm grateful for your presence here this evening, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Thank you so much, LaRon. All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started on our presentations for the evening. As I mentioned, we have three very unique styles of compelling communication that will be demonstrated tonight. First, why are we doing this? Studies show that being an effective and compelling communicator is one of the top 3 skills required of CEOs, leaders, and community champions. Being an effective communicator is often what separates those that apply from jobs from those that actually get the jobs. So we believe that it's an important skill set to have, not only on the job, but in community. We wanted to have this event tonight because we believe that there should be no hindrance to more people of color being involved in the civic spaces of Northeast Ohio, but also in rising to the ranks of leadership on the job. So with that, again, we have 3 speakers that will present tonight. The first will be Dr. John Betterson, Supply and Equipment Management Officer at NASA Glenn Research Center, and also the President of the Aerospace Toastmasters. Mr. Leon Bibb, Anchor with WKYC, and Mr. Jared Pratt, Director of the Pratt Center at Cleveland State University. We will begin with Dr. John Betterson, who will have 8 minutes to present his remarks. Each of the presenters will have a total of 8 minutes to give their remarks. We have given them a topic in advance of the event, and the topic is Write Your Retirement Speech. So with that, I'm going to call Dr. Betterson up to the stage, and he will have his 8 minutes.
Well, again, thank you for that very warm introduction, Marcella. Wow, has it really been 40 years? That sounds like a really long time, doesn't it? Well, to honor this occasion and to justify this speech, I think it's only appropriate that I give all of you a minute for every year that I've worked here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. I'll be very brief. I remember when I first started with this company. I was fresh out of school, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, brand new to the workforce, young, energetic, and ready to change the world. Well, my school days are far behind me now. My eyes are a little dimmer, and my tail is not quite as bushy. Instead of being brand new to the workforce, I find myself applying for workman's comp. My energy level isn't quite the same, and as far as changing the world, my world has changed dramatically. But with all of that said, I stand here tonight looking back over a long, successful career, not because of anything that I brought to you, but because of everything you gave to me. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to train, develop, and mold me into the employee that you see standing here before you tonight. You know, it's been said that it takes a village to raise a child. I agree with that. I also happen to believe that it takes an entire company to build a teammate. And for every time that I rushed by a teachable moment, you were there to slow me down and teach me. For every time I missed an opportunity, you were there to create new ones. For every time that I dropped the ball or missed an opportunity or missed what I should have been doing, you were there to provide cover and pick up the pieces. You know, working here with all of you for the last 40 years has been an extraordinary journey. I'll never forget the laughs, the company picnics, the Christmas parties, the projects we all worked on, and the friendships, far too many to list. You can be sure that I will take these experiences with me wherever I go in life. And while I do understand that while some things may not last forever, I happen to believe that memories do last, and I will remember all of you. So before I go, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Fellow colleagues, friends, for every purpose in life, there is a time and a season. There's a time to laugh and a time to weep, a time to dance and a time to mourn, a time to work, and believe it or not, there is a time to retire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Betterson. So we will take questions and comments at the end of the 3 demonstrations, but I just wanted to share briefly, I thought that was an amazing use of humor, wonderful tone and inflection, no script, which is very impressive, no filler words, and a very effective use of cliches. Thank you so much, Dr. Betterson. Let's give him another round of applause. Our next presenter truly needs no introduction. He is known as one of Cleveland's top storytellers, so much so that he actually came out of retirement to continue his trade. Please welcome Mr. Leon Bibb, anchor with WKYC.
Thank you, Marcella. Good evening, everybody. Good to be here with you today. It really is. People ask me how I got into this business of television. I said it really started at Miles Standish Elementary School, where I was in the 6th grade. I had a 6th grade teacher by the name of Robert Taylor. Mr. Taylor came up to me one day and said, "How would you like to write the 6th grade graduation play as you kids are going from the 6th grade on to junior high school?" I said, "Mr. Taylor, I would love to do that." So I began to write the play. It took me several weeks. Sometimes after school, I would go to Mr. Taylor's house. He lived in the neighborhood. My parents knew him, knew his wife, knew his children. He lived right around the corner from the school, and we would work on it after school. Mr. Taylor helped me with transitions in the play. When it came time to cast the play, being no slouch, I cast myself in one of the key roles. Not the lead actor, but one of the featured actors. And we kids would get into, I had written into this contraption, it was a time machine. And we'd get in the time machine and we could go forward all the way to the year 2000, a long way from now. Or we could go back to 1776 and see the signing of the Declaration of Independence or something like that. At the end of the day, people applauded, mothers and fathers who came to see the play that graduation day in the auditorium of the school. And they applauded. Mr. Taylor took me aside, standing by room 103, our homeroom. He put his hands on my 11-year-old shoulders, and he said, "Son, you have a gift. It is a gift of words. It is a gift of writing. And if I were you, I would think about a career where I could be a writer." He said, "I see you as a playwright or a journalist." A light went off. I immediately knew what I wanted to do for my professional life. Of course, I was only 11. And he told me, of course, you've got to go to junior high, and you got to go to high school, college after that, and other things. And from that day on, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I would go home at night, and as I would lay in my bed on Parkgate Avenue in the Glenville area, I had a little radio, a transistor radio with a long antenna. And attached to that antenna was a wire, which I ran around it. And I ran this copper wire all the way from the second floor, all the way up to the third floor, and around the post up on the third floor. A huge antenna. Now I can listen to the world. Not only Cleveland radio stations, but I could listen to stations as far away as St. Louis. And I would lay in bed with a little earphone in my ear, listening to those radio announcers with the baritone voices. This is KMOX in St. Louis. This is WWL in New Orleans. This is WLW in Cincinnati. This is WCCO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. WABC, WABC, WNBC, WCBS, New York City. I would listen to them, and I wanted to be part of that. I would listen to the commercials, the men and the women who did commercials, and they would pour maybe a Budweiser into a glass right next to the microphone and say, "Isn't it time for a Bud? Good drinking Bud." I was just a kid, but it was in me. And when I went off to Bowling Green State University to study journalism, in my sophomore year, the man who ran the college radio station, the professor, asked me if I would like to work on the radio station as a newscaster. And I said I would love that. I was 19 years old. So he told me to go on over to the radio station. They knew I was coming, and I would do a 5 to 10 minute newscast 5 days a week. And I went over there on the first night. I went on because I was listening to rock and roll. I was listening to CKLW in Windsor, Ontario, right across the river from Detroit. And that was my model. And I would come on the air. Good evening, everybody. This is Leon Bibb. It's 82 degrees in downtown Bowling Green, and these are the news headlines. This is what's happening. And I would do the news in that way. The next day, Mr. Sidney Stone came to me and says, "Leon, we're not a rock station. We play symphony music. You are between Beethoven and Bach. So keep that in mind when you do your newscast." The next night, "Good evening, everyone. This is Leon Bibb, and these are the headlines." I would do that. Now back to more Ludwig van Beethoven, that kind of thing. I was bitten by that bug, but I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I got a job in television early on in Toledo, Ohio. And one day I was driving along as a reporter, photographer, and an editor, doing the job of 3 people for $6,500 a year in the 1970s, full-time staff reporter. And I'm driving, and there's a guy hitchhiking. He's got his thumb out on a cold day. He's hitchhiking. I'm in a company car, unmarked news car, and I'm alone. And I passed him. Not my car. I can't pick up hitchhikers. But I recognized this guy's face. I'd seen him around town. I'd seen him at social gatherings. I was in my 20s. I'd seen him around. And I kept on driving. I'm in a news car. I'm not even in my car. I can't pick up a hitchhiker. And about a half mile down the road, a voice said, "Pick him up. Pick him up." I'm the only one in the car. And I heard the voice as surely and as clearly as you hear mine. "Pick him up." And I drove for another half mile. A mile down the road, I made a U-turn and went back and picked him up. And when the young man, a student at the University of Toledo, got into the car, he said, "You're Leon Bibb at the CBS station, WTOL television." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, I was brand new. I'd only been there 9 months. He said, "My girlfriend's mother wondered whatever happened to you." "Who's your girlfriend's mother?" "She's the public affairs director for the NBC station in Columbus, Ohio. She had talked about you. We were in college. You had applied, but there was nothing happening in Columbus when you applied." I was at Bowling Green then as a student. So he said, "Why don't you call her?" I called her that night, and she said, "I remember you, son. Are you available? Are you looking for a job?" I says, "I got a job, but I'm looking to leave." She says, "I want you to call the news director, but I don't want you to call him for about 30 minutes. I want to call him and tell him about you." So 30 minutes later, I called, and he told me we'll set up for an interview. The day of the interview, which was a week after the hitchhiker, it was 10 below zero in Toledo. All over the state of Ohio was below zero. And of course, my Volkswagen Bug had a dead battery. How am I going to get to this interview? But I called him and told him, I'll be 6 hours late, if that's okay. How are you going to get here, son? I'm going to take a Greyhound bus. And I got a ride to the bus station, and I took a Greyhound bus for an interview in 10 below zero weather. Walked in there, he says, son, I want you to know something. You have character. You've got character, and I like that. Now let's see if you can read and write and see if you can do television. We put me through a little test. I went back on the Greyhound bus that evening. The next day he called me over the phone and offered me a job. 3 weeks from the day of the hitchhiker, I went on the air in Columbus, Ohio, February 14th, 1972. I've been on the air straight ever since then, except for the year I took off to retire from Channel 5 before I go back to Channel 3. I've been on the air ever since. Luck? I don't believe in luck. I believe in being prepared. And I believe in God. I believe God was the voice I heard. And I believe God put the hitchhiker at the side of the road. Moral of the story? Many morals. Stay with it. Get in what you love. Do what you love. Listen to those who say you've got a gift. My school teacher, sixth grade teacher, you've got a gift, son. Listen to those people. Follow your destiny. Believe in yourself. Show up every day and keep on working. This was the story I told when I retired from Channel 5. And I says, it's difficult to step away, but I'm going to step away, realizing that Channel 3 had already called me and says, you ain't done yet, so come on over here, take a year off, and come on over here. That is my retirement story. And I'll have to tell it again when I retire 10 years from now.
Mr. Bibb, listening to you is a true treat for the senses. It's like we can see it, feel it, and hear it when you speak. As if your voice is not enough, your use of descriptives, making it feel like it's a conversation, almost like we're riding a wave, is something to enjoy. Thank you so much. Our final demonstration will be Mr. Jared Pratt, Director of the Pratt Center at Cleveland State University.
I think you left the mic a little hot. Spoken word. I have 2 poems, both brief. The first, I will recite to you in the traditional spoken word fashion. The second one, because of the nature of it, I have to read because it makes me emotional. Anybody who knows me knows my mother was Dr. Charlotte C. Pratt. And both of these poems were inspired by experiences that I had with her. The first was as a teenager, and it's entitled Poor Misguided Youth. And it is an expression of my opinion of the youth at that time through the lens that I had. Poor misguided youth. They live their life in spoofs of movies that they've never seen. They've heard the speech, but they missed the dream. They're killing themselves over any means. Life in these urban jungles, looking for anything to put their scents on. They're dying over turf, properties that their mothers just rent on. See, public school is outrageous. Ignorance must be contagious, and what's scarier is it does not enrage us. By us, I mean the people. Black, white, or indifferent. Our sons are failing English to get PhDs in pimping. Our girls are failing PE because they're too cute to change clothes, but they get dressed like that chick everywhere they go. See, hold on to your future, baby. I don't want you to lose it. 2 kids get into a fight because in their headphones, they listening to the same music. I wonder, does anyone else find that confusing? Childhood's wasted on front steps. If young men can cook crack so good, they can also be top chefs. But their potentials are on the top shelf, and their arms ain't long enough to reach. They too short for the NBA, but what's the height requirement to teach? See, your 2 cents could be another man's million. A kind word is a foundation to start building. My God, how I fear for these children. Someone has to tell them. It takes a lifetime to build a rep and only a second to destroy it. You can have all the money in the world and still not enjoy it. To our young queens, please pass on. Yes, one man's trash can be another man's treasure, but you do not have to be treated like trash to discover your inner treasure. If you always be you, then be you and not some phony. Keep one eye on God, the rest on them, and you'll have a testimony. I think I'm tripping, giving you all my opinion of the truth, speaking to you on behalf of the poor, the misguided, the youth. For poets, what you'll know is poems are never finished. And in our minds, we can always kind of go back. And so decades later, maybe a decade and a half later, my mother asked me to write a response to poor misguided youth because she said when she heard it, it made her sad. You got to bring some more hope than that. And so my response was a poem entitled Rich, Well-Guided Stars. Rich, well-guided stars, live your lives with the courage that heroes have on darkest nights. Be opulent with your life. Rich, well-guided stars, listen to the voices of ancestors who whisper through gentle breezes. And when your heart strays and does what it pleases, you have the discipline to rein it in. Because if you are to reign again, then you must do more than plant seeds and wait for the rain. See, rich, well-guided stars, there will be pain. But whatever your happenstance is, be ye not overwhelmed by your circumstance is. And when they raise the question of pedigree, let your life be the testimony that articulates legibly with the indemnity of the wealth stolen from generations ago. And regardless of who your father was, know who your father is. Rich, well-guided stars, shake off the sleepiness of modernness. For you are a rich, well-guided star. Choose to shine where others grow dim. And early loss is only the prelim. And if they take this body, let me sleep until I see the rematch. After I have spent time with my Creator, perhaps, and I have been told, well done for the way that I let my little light shine. Pray for my lifeline, that I may be a lighthouse to others lost at sea. Darkness, let me be, for I have work to do, because I am a rich, well-guided star.
All right, loved it, Mr. Pratt. One thing that I love about spoken word is that I feel it is telling a story to the beat of this generation. And I appreciate that so much about spoken word. It raises our awareness, don't you think? It makes us think. It's using words almost to a hidden music. And it's really what's missing in today's version of hip hop. So with that, we are going to welcome our three demonstrators to the stage for a brief panel discussion and Q&A with the audience. So Mr. Pratt, Mr. Bibb, and Mr. Betterson, please join us up on stage. So many things get lost when we communicate ineffectively, but there can be so many bridges that can be built when we use communication more effectively. I'd like to open up our Q&A session with a question to all three of our demonstrators. What are some of the most effective ways that you use to capture the audience from the onset of your presentation or speech?
Is this on? Well, I'll go first. So thank you for the question.
Sure.
So I think she shared with you earlier tonight that I am very active in Toastmasters. And one of the tips that we share with one another is whenever you craft your speech, try to use something in the beginning that will grab your audience's attention, right? A really exciting, meaningful opening. And that's not always easy to do. Some people use jokes. Some people use a quote. A lot of people will invite the audience to take a trip with them by closing their eyes. So there are different ways that you can really catch your audience at the very beginning and grab their attention. So attention grabbers at the beginning are useful, they're important, and there are a myriad of ways to reach that. So
I think sometimes that go back to what I said when we got to the story of the hitchhiker. There's a line in there I always use. It always resonates well with, especially with women. When the hitchhiker gets in the car, he says, "My girlfriend's mother wondered whatever happened to you." People kind of think it's going in one direction, but it's really going in another direction. And I think if you can find what I call the bait and put that out there, that the fish will go for that, and you are the fish. And that is not derogatory, by the way. You're the fish, and I'm trying to reel you in with my story. And also, I think it is to paint a picture. I thought he painted pictures, you painted pictures. The PhD and the pimp. You made a reference there. And I like the alliteration of it. But I try to paint a picture. And one of the things when I tell my stories is, and I don't know if other folks have this ability, I see it in front of me like a movie, and I'm only saying what I see. I actually see it all over again, and I just try to describe what I'm seeing. So that's what I use.
I think that the people respond to confidence, and when you watch, the line is, our sons are failing English to get PhDs in pimping. We have more young writers and more young scholars who just don't have a content area. When you see the passion by which they write their lyrics down, that's different than the deportment that they have when they stand in front of an audience. And sometimes that confidence doesn't transfer. And my question to them is always, how can you be confident about living in a neighborhood where danger is right outside your door, but be afraid to speak in front of people who came to hear what you had to say? And knowing that what you're saying, you have a passion about it, even if you are unsettled or nervous about who you're speaking to, saying it to yourself and believing it. And even if you have to close your eyes, it would be better to stand on your 2 feet and to speak with confidence than it would be to trust that what you've written down is going to carry over. When I sang in the choir as a child, they would say, you could hit the wrong note and the audience wouldn't know unless you made a face or told them. And that's true. You know, some people who sing solos, voices crack, and unless they let you know, they could pretend that was emotional and they will respond, but people respond to that. People also respond when you're not confident. And when you don't believe what it is that you're saying. And so I think that it's important to know your audience, but to also put yourself in the audience, not to be speaking about things that you wouldn't want to hear about. And so to sit back and listen to yourself. So you're saying it and how you perceive it, because you can coach yourself. And I think that that's important, because when you're confident about what's on the paper, it's going to come across when you speak to the crowd.
Thank you. What are some of the top challenges that you all have observed when it comes to effective communication or public speech?
So I'll take that one. So one challenge I found, well, there's several, but one of the biggest challenges I run across is preparation. Practice, practice, practice. Prepare. I can't emphasize that enough. I don't know how many ceremonies or events I've attended, and I'm sure you could probably relate, where the moderator or the person on the agenda will even have the script in front of them and eventually blow the line, misread someone's name, mispronounce it wrong, incorrectly, stutter, stammer, and so sometimes I sit in the audience feeling really uncomfortable for the individual, right? Because they didn't take the time to just practice and prepare. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is, and we're talking about compelling communication, so it's really difficult, and I appreciate both the gentlemen up here on the stage, Mr. Bibb and our brother Pratt, the ability to string together memorable lines, whether it's a one-liner, several lines, an entire stanza. My point is, when we communicate, it's really difficult to put together just the right sentence or arrangement of words so that it resonates with the audience. So I think about people like, you think about John F. Kennedy, right? In his famous one-liner, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? You think about Martin Luther King and his famous I Have a Dream speech. Even going back as far as Abraham Lincoln in his very famous opening line, 77 years ago. I mean, people remember that. Even Michelle Obama, right? When they go low, we go high. Exactly. These are things that people come away with because they're powerful one-liners. So I think that's a challenge. And if you can achieve that, you've got half the battle.
Sometimes you don't even have to go long. We were given 8 minutes. I think I took about 8:30, I believe. You don't have to go long. You mentioned Abraham Lincoln, and that's the Gettysburg Address, which Lincoln gave 77 years ago. He gave that at the dedication of the Gettysburg Cemetery. That speech is about 3 minutes long. There was a speaker before Abraham Lincoln who spoke for 2 hours. He's forgotten in history. Lincoln's speech still resonates. And another thing I think I will say on this question, pauses can have strength. You hear what I said? Pauses can have strength, as opposed to pauses can have strength. Pauses can have strength.
I think in terms of challenges, one of the things that always sort of rubs me the wrong way when I'm in a presentation is when the presenter is not taking it seriously, as if my time was not valuable to them. I made a mistake. I'm gonna start over. Okay, y'all bear with me. Okay, hold on. And that's fine, because informality has its place. But you can't get $1 million check with a $100 proposal. And so when you are in a room, especially where you're making a proposal and you are trying to solicit people's trust and their belief in you, it's important to show up in that room and to be in that room. And we call it residence and taking ownership of that moment. So I may not ever have another opportunity to speak to you. So I need to make sure that when I speak to you, I've prepared myself, but I'm also confident enough that now that I have your attention, when you leave me, you're gonna remember me. And I believe that because I've prepared for that to happen. And I cannot stress enough how I had a researcher professor who told me you could make a subpar research topic outstanding with a wonderful presentation. Or you could make a wonderful research topic boring with a terrible presentation. And that really is up to you. That legwork is up to you before you stand in front to be able to recognize this may be my shot. This is my moment. So every time it's fourth quarter, 2 seconds left on the clock, and it's my game to win. But that's my mentality. And whether I nail it or not, I just take ownership of the fact that it was my moment, and this is my shot.
Thank you. Preparing for compelling communication is a challenge for many people. Some people enjoy having all of their remarks scripted. Some people believe in that spontaneous presentation. How do you usually prepare for a formal presentation or a speech?
I'm gonna go first to break up the order. You're gonna laugh, but one of the things that I always do, and you should do, and I promise, so don't laugh at me when I say this. Before you go do your presentation, you should stand in the bathroom in your Superman pose in front of the mirror. I kid you not. What you want to do is you want to get the adrenaline pumping in your body. If you think that performers who are performing on stage in front of packed audiences are not nervous, what they've learned how to do is channel that energy, and they've learned how to focus that. And so I'm not going to let the anxiety overwhelm me. And how you do that is really, I mean, it might be silly to stand in front of the mirror like Superman, but in that moment I got to be telling myself I got superpowers because I'm getting ready to go do something awesome. And that's the way you have to prepare yourself and to me, to embrace that. As silly as that sounds.
let me say amen to that, because that's exactly what I do. On occasion, I'm on stage and I will perform with an orchestra. I've performed with the Cleveland Orchestra. I've performed with the Akron Symphony Orchestra, and we've done a couple of things. Among them was a Lincoln Portrait. And we have our rehearsals where there's a narrator's part with the symphony music playing beneath you, and you drop out and the music comes up and then you go back in. And it takes some rehearsal to do that. But you don't want to screw that up, because you're the only one speaking, and if you drop your lines, then you're just kind of hanging out there. But in the dressing room, I do exactly what you say. I actually look in the mirror, and I put my nose almost on the mirror, looking directly into my eyes on the mirror, and I say a prayer, and then I usually say something like, "Okay, Mr. Bibb, let's make magic." But that's how I set myself. That means I'm ready for business, and I'm ready to do this. And so you have to, I have a script with me. I've got the script in front of me. Another thing I do is, if I'm giving a speech and it's scripted and it's outside where the wind is blowing, I've seen the pages get blown away. That's why when I'm speaking outside, I always have a backup script in my pocket.
Well, I don't have a cape, but I do understand the concept, and I agree with that. So to my brother's point, I think it's important, something that I do. People really don't understand the psychology behind communication. It's really a psychology and a science to it. Whenever you're communicating or speaking with a large group or a small group, people do not want to see you get it wrong. People do not want to see you fail. And if you kind of remind yourself of those points, it might help. Another thing is, I try to see myself doing well when I'm delivering a speech. Much to my brother's point that he alluded to earlier, the Superman pose. That's a confidence builder, right? You want to make sure that mentally and psychologically you are postured to do well, much like you would prepare for an interview. Another thing people don't understand about communication, no one's going to know if you missed a line or made a mistake, unless, like you mentioned earlier, you tell them, right? The last point is this. I've seen people in small group settings, family, friends, become very passionate about the next sale at Macy's, their job, the raise they just received, their family outing, and they communicate like Les Brown, like Barack Obama. They're fluent, they're energized because they're comfortable and they're passionate about it. And that's in the space of 3 people. All of a sudden, the dynamics change when you're in front of the room and it's 500 people. You're still communicating, right? People want to see that energy. They want to feel your passion. And if you can just convince yourself that they want to see you do well, you can communicate just as effectively in a small group and people that you know, as well as you can in front of strangers in a large group. So it's really psychological at the end of the day.
Thank you. So now we're going to take some questions from the audience. If you have a question that you would like to pose to our panel, please stand. And if we could maybe have one of the microphones brought over, please. So we would ask that you stand and state your name and go ahead and proceed with your question.
Hi, I'm Ron Woodford. My question is actually to Mr. Bibb. See, so when I was a kid, I'm from New York, right? So, they say we talk differently. I don't think we do. But anyway, when I went for my first job at IBM, I had on the suit and everything. I met everything. So the fellow, we go through, we do a test. Then he says to me, okay, you're going to go do the interview now. So, let's kind of give me what are you going to say? So I said, okay. It was in '69. I said, well, I graduated from high school 4 years ago, and I went to the Air Force. And he said, wait a minute, can you sound like the man on the 6 o'clock news? All right? So when you were saying that kind of resonated with me. So that is a learned process, I would guess, right? that when you were making the comments about announcing the different radio stations, because I think if we can get our kids to talk more like that, that might be helpful. It may make it easier for people to understand them, right? Because when you start using jargon and using slang and using different inflections, right, that kind of takes away from the message. Okay, so what do you propose to children to?
What did I do to?
Well, what would you propose to children? What can you offer? I mean, my kids talk like the man from the 6 o'clock news because, I mean, I grew up with Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, all right? So that's who they, you know what I mean? But of course you get, well, you're trying to sound white. Well, I'm not trying to sound white. I'm trying to sound like the man on the 6 o'clock news because people understand him. So what do we do to our kids? What can we do in maybe in the Toastmasters, just in the way that we, you understand what I'm saying? You teach them content, you teach them behavior, you teach them a number of things, but that actual speech pattern sometimes takes away from everything else that they have.
My native language is English. It's the one I speak the best. I speak a little French and a little profanity too on occasion. But my native language is English, and the way I speak is the way I always spoke. This is how my parents spoke, and I try to use that, all the time. I don't change my speech patterns for different audiences. If I was speaking to young black kids, I wouldn't try to put on airs and do a hip hop thing. That's not me. I just speak the way that I speak. It's the language of my country, and so I use that approach. I can't tell you anything differently than that, but I do know that there is a place for. I mean, if I get, over the bar, we'll have a few wines over there. My speech pattern may change just a little bit because I'm comfortable with that. It may change a little bit, and I go back to some high school things. But generally speaking, this is how I am, and this is what works for me. I tell people, go with what works for you. In this country, they do look for broadcasters who have what's called general American speech. If you go in the South, the newscasters down there sound pretty much, generally speaking, like the newscasters everywhere else. And I think it's just called general American speech. And that's about the only answer that I can give you. I've just been blessed with an ability to not start a word until I finish the first word. I try to put some separation between the syllables or the syllables there, if you know what I'm talking about. And I hope that answers your question, Ron.
Well, if I can add to some of that, so that's great. So I am actually from New York City myself. I'm from the Bronx. And most people don't believe that because of my diction, I imagine, right. So I think what the gentleman was after when he asked you to mimic someone from the 6 o'clock news, the term I've heard was non-regional diction, not necessarily talking or speaking like another group. But a non-regional diction means, I believe, you can't place the person in a certain area. So that's the first thing. Now, my daughters are heavily involved in forensics and speech and debate. And they listen to a lot of speeches, and they've listened to a lot of students communicate. Not to say that they've mimicked anyone or put on airs, but I think depending on the situation, cadence is important. Lots of people get dinged for speaking too quickly or too fast, and that has to do with cadence. Sometimes it's just a matter of slowing down. There's a really great movie, The Great Debaters, Denzel Washington, and there's a scene where he has all his students standing on a boat with a cork in their mouth to enunciate their words, not to pretend to be someone different, but for communication purposes, you have to clearly communicate, pronounce all of your syllables, all of the consonants, all of the vowels in a certain manner. So I think with practice, that can happen. But I think that's what some of that is about. It's about cadence, I believe, in general practice. But the news commentating, from what I understand, it's about having a non-regional diction. Brian Gumbel was infamous for people claim that he sounded like a certain group. That wasn't the case. He just had a clear diction. So if that helps, I don't know.
Do you mind if I throw my 2 cents in? So I'm an intervention specialist by trade, right? So I work with students with disabilities. One of the things that was the hardest for me was that, so they don't teach phonics in school anymore, if you notice. And what parents, you should know, the thing called the third grade guarantee is also associated with something that's called the fourth grade slide. Meaning by third grade, if your child has not learned how to read, then they cannot read anything to learn. So if I'm still figuring out how to the word attack the words, if I'm still trying to figure out how to sound them out, then as my vocabulary should be growing, it can't, because I can't digest. And they tell you all, don't believe, I know about weight loss, but yeah. What they'll tell you is that exercise does not have the same impact as diet, right? And if you change your diet, to take the same songs that our young people are listening to, go to Google and print out the lyrics and sit down with your child and make them grammatically correct the lyrics to the song. And then make them express to you what is the intent of the song with the actual correct grammar. You'd be surprised how much of the skill transfers, because now I'm able to take the lyrics, I'm able to interpret, and now I can also code switch. Because I know Drake said it like this, but this is what he meant. And I get the interpretation. I want to know, do you have the skills to decipher? Can you translate what his meaning was with the actual skill? Watch a movie together and turn the sound off and turn the subtitles on. And so now we have to watch the same movie together, but we have to read, because that increases our processing speed. Because now as the words are coming across the screen, we're reading those together. But I'm also increasing your vocabulary, because I'm teaching you how to read, I'm teaching you how to process those. And what happens with our students often, they have thousands of songs cataloged in their minds, but they have difficulty reading a page of literature. It's the same, as he says, all communication, it's the same skill. I have to get you to feel differently about the skill, though.
I have 7 children, and my wife is an adamant reader. I mean, I literally have well over probably 10,000 books. I mean, the shelves are bowing. And this is what I mean when I say this. From very young, my wife religiously reads, to the point where my children are no longer just watching the pictures, but they get to the point, they like to call it, I can now read chapter books. That's when they've moved on from the younger books. The point is, I cannot go in my kid's room today, pick a book off the shelf and pretend and skip a page, because they know that they've read every single word. And like the brother alluded to and mentioned, your vocabulary increases. My 5-year-old has a vocabulary probably most second graders don't have. And that comes from reading. You can't increase your vocabulary through osmosis. You know, I'm in Toastmasters, like you mentioned earlier. We have an exercise called Word of the Day. Every single meeting, someone has to introduce a brand new word, but it's not enough to hear that word, to express what it means, and then for the rest of the meeting, we all are graded on whether or not we use that brand new word. You have to use it. You can't just assume that it's going to be applied to your vernacular, right? So your vocabulary is critical. So that's a great point. I agree.
I'll tell you something else that I love to do. And I listen to audiobooks. I've done hundreds and hundreds. In fact, I would love to get into reading audiobooks, novels. I've done hundreds of books, usually in the car. And you can hear the language of a good reader. And especially it's a book that you're interested in. I only do books I'm interested in, usually novels. And I get into them. And a good reader can give you the cadence, and you can pick up, well, you can learn about whatever the book is about. My favorite book of all the books I've done that I've heard is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, read by David Suchet. And David Suchet, when he reads, there are 14 characters in the book. When he reads the words of that character exactly as it's written, you know who's talking because of the accent. I love accents. I mean, I can go into Russian accents and Italian accents. I do all of those. And I love listening to audiobooks, but if you get into audiobooks, something else will happen. Storytelling. It's a good book that holds your interest. I actually did the one on, years ago, I did The Life of Abraham Lincoln. And when it went to the funeral of Abraham Lincoln, I was on Prospect Avenue on my way to work. I had to pull the car to the side and cry. It was as if I were there.
We may have time for one more question.
I have a question, and you may have touched on some of it. My name is Nancy Walker. For those of us who did not have, at least recognize the gift or have the gift that many of you have expressed you've had since a young age, and that's the gift of communication, being able to speak, etc. I thought about the question that the gentleman had, but he said, what would you tell children? My question is, what would you tell us adults? What suggestions would you give for those who unfortunately did not have the exposure that it sounds like many of you had coming up with learning about communications? What suggestion would you have now to adults, especially those who probably have a little fear? How would you suggest we go about improving our communication skills now?
Shameless plug, join Toastmasters, sorry. Now, and I say that in jest, but I am serious at the same time. It's an adult organization for communication, helping to build the confidence. Now, it is not the panacea to becoming an effective communicator. It is just a resource. There are many programs out there like Toastmasters.
Honestly, can't we?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you're really basic, probably have a lot of fear. Is that for people?
That's what it's for.
Okay.
Absolutely, 100%. I've seen people walk in the door fearful, frozen at the idea of getting in front of the room. Maybe they're not as secure with their vocabulary. Whatever the issue is, they've gone from that. A few months later, you would think they were world-renowned speakers. It is that effective of a program, but you have to attend and participate. It works. I've seen people whereby English was their second language. They do not have a command of the English language. They're from the Middle East. They're from Central America. They become a Toastmaster, and I'm telling you, you would not be able to tell that they are struggling. Or once upon a time, there was a struggle. They become effective communicators, so it's very possible.
Just hang in there with it. Pick out one person to talk to. Pick out one person to talk to. I did that right now. I can pick out a couple of people. I've looked at certain people here, catch their vibrations. When I'm on the air, well, I'm not nervous about going on the air now unless we're unprepared and it's late breaking stuff. But generally, I'm okay. When I'm on the air, people say, do you get nervous speaking to 19 Northeast Ohio counties live? I said, I just speak to the one cameraman. I speak to, and the 19 people, 19 counties are just kind of looking in. It doesn't matter whether it's 1 million people or one person. You do your level best all the time. And if you've got butterflies at the beginning, that's okay. I came in with butterflies. I wasn't certain what I was going to say. Marcella introduced me and I says, oh, I better change. I was going to go in another direction. But I believe in myself. I know that I will do this. I know that I can get through this. I know that I know my stories. And speak on stuff you know. I'm not going to start talking about what's going on in NASA and space exploration. I can talk a little bit about it, but that's not my expertise. I can talk about these other things. And I'm not going to delve into Dre and hip hop because I'm not certain who Dre is. Well, I know who Dre is, but speak on what you know.
I would say that the lotto jackpot was at $1.6 million. And so apparently somebody in South Carolina won, but even though I tried, you're not going to have to tell that person how to spend that money tomorrow. When people went and bought the ticket, they had an anticipation that if I win, I already know what I want to do with this. Because that instant transformation, I'm automatically going to have access to something that I didn't, which is going to make me richer. there is nothing stopping you from doing that with language. And every word that you learn, every experience that you have that makes you richer, you should be as willing to go out and spend that currency as you would if you had just won the lotto, because it is making you richer. And people, my friends would laugh at me. My wife will tell you, the only two channels I really watch at home are TCM and the news. And my friends will tell you, TCM, that's all I watched since I was a kid. But I grew up on Julius Caesar and Cleopatra and Rex Harrison and monologues. And so I exposed myself. It wasn't that I just had a command of language. I watched great orators. I saw how they spoke. I listened to those speeches. And I sat in church and I listened to different preachers and how they had different. So when you go to a Baptist church, they preach this way. You go to a Methodist church, they preach this way. Go to a Pentecostal church, they preach. All those are different ways of communication. And I just drank all that in. And there was nothing stopping me from, if that man said a word that I like, my favorite word since I was a child has been juxtaposition. I don't know why. I heard somebody say it one day and said, this is a juxtaposition. I thought that is a wonderful word. I just like the way that, I think you sound smart when you say it. But I heard somebody else use it. I went and found out what it meant, to be in between two things, to be juxtaposed to something. And so I made a point to use it. Something else that my father did, every time he used a new vocabulary word, to this day, he reaches in his pocket and he throws me a quarter. And 37 years old, I could say a new word around him, and he said, that's a good word. Hold on. And it inspired in me a desire to learn those words and do it. So find a friend, and if you have a nephew, a son, and do the same thing. A quarter, it's a small investment. Every time you bring me a word that I don't know, I'm gonna put a quarter in this jar. And every time I learn the word, we're gonna see how fast we fill these jars up. And that wealth represents the value that you have now inherited for yourself, that language. Because all the quarters in that jar mean those are all the words that you know. And it's the same thing. You're not gonna have to tell that person how to spend that money with the lotto ticket, because they already had dreams. You couldn't tell me that I wasn't gonna do something with language. It was just a question of learning it. And so if the desire is there to learn it, then that's half the battle. And that really is half of it. The want and the desire to be exposed to that, and then putting yourself in proximity to have that exposure. Events like this, grabbing the microphone and asking a question that might have been on somebody else's mind. It's the same thing. And so when you leave, you should feel esteemed in yourself. Okay, I did that. And so next time it doesn't have to be a question.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our panelists. Dr. John Betterson from NASA Glenn, Mr. Leon Bibb from WKYC, and Mr. Jared Pratt from Cleveland State University. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great evening.